All right, this is the Dossier podcast with Jordan Schachtel. Today we have an awesome guest, Nathan Leamer, a longtime DC guy, but not, I wouldn't attach him to DC. He's kind of like, leading the sane entities there. Nathan's the executive director of Build American AI, um, based in DC, but they have, very similar to what we're doing at the Innovation Council, very pro innovation agenda. They want to see America win this AI race with China. Nathan, himself is very invested in making sure we build out this specific physical infrastructure, all stuff that's, I think, very important to you personally. And, Nathan's a good friend and, really a great connector in the DC world, making sure the good guys are talking to each other. So I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. First time, long time. I think this might be one of the first times we've actually seen each other. We've always just been on the phone with each other for the past couple of months. So it's nice to actually see you and chat and be part of this podcast.
Yeah, it's nice in Florida. I come when I come down to DC, it's usually for very short stints, but inevitably I end up spending some time there. So we'll definitely get together, to talk about all kinds of all this crazy stuff going on the Hill and whatnot. But yeah, so we're talking on Friday, July 17th. We have kind of like a mutual adversary in this organization, called Humans First, that I've written about a little bit in the dossier. Nathan has talked about them a little bit separately. This AstroTurf, like, degrowth organization that's positioning itself as a conservative operation, despite being incorporated in San Francisco and by these like Pause AI people who are very much part of the left. Nathan's done a lot of good research on this front, and I think it's really good to talk to you about this stuff because it's just like we're being so constantly gaslit by these stop AI, pause AI forces, and then they're like slapping all kinds of labels on what they're doing. So tomorrow there's big data center protests. Let's see who shows up across the country. This organization called Humans First is organizing and sponsoring this stuff. What do you make of it?
Well, I don't know if they're sponsoring it or if they're still using Center for AI Safety's money, which was used as a loan to create the organization. So I'm not sure if it's their money or if it's Center for AI Safety, but run through them. That's, I think, the first question people should be asking. I don't know how big it will be. I'm not sure, how big it would be, but you're right. Like there's an emphasis from their crew to go out and talk about how bad data centers are. I learned about it on social media, which I thought was pretty ironic. They're not handing out flyers. They're not going physical, handing out flyers old fashioned. They're using the power of data centers to spread the message about how awful data centers are. But that's kind of par for the course, where a lot of these conversations around AI are separate, are basically divorced from reality or divorced from understanding of how things work. And that's been kind of their MO and in the way that they've engaged on this, because for them it's a story of holding Americans back, the anti-abundance campaign, and there are a lot of people who want to do that, and they are a central character in that conversation.
It's interesting. This is happening. I feel like it's the worst timing ever for an organization that's trying to stop, the build out of American infrastructure, when we have these reports coming out of China that their AI models are now on par. Not even a generous interpretation. They say some of their stuff is better, but clearly very competitive in China. They don't have the red tape that we have. And yet we have these forces, some of them of which are unfortunately attached to a very notable frontier AI company that has its own agenda. But there's these forces that are trying to basically sabotage the build out of this physical infrastructure. Have you seen these reports about what China's doing? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are in a competition where every few months different models are going to come out, and it has been noticeable over the past several years, starting with DeepSeek, that China is making incredible strides. This is, how these conversations go. They did this in the telecom space. They eventually caught up in many ways in the telecommunication space. They've caught up in some ways in automobiles. I saw the head of Ford talk about how, China, when they come into the market here, will have good products to sell Americans, and that are competitive with our own. And so, I think it's not surprising that AI is the same way. But while China is focusing full bore on creating these models and making sure that they deploy as fast as they can, and they're doing this, they're also spending money and capital on propaganda in the US. The Bitcoin Policy Center has been very clear on this in their recent studies, and we've seen a lot of reports on this from Capitol Hill and others saying, like, they're spending money, they're spending time and resources to foment anti AI narratives in America. And again, like, I understand why there are concerns, and I understand why people are uneasy about things they don't understand, and are new. And a generation have been raised on Star Wars and Terminator and science fiction. So it's understandable why the idea of AI can be complicated for public. And I think China and some other interests have fed off of that and leveraged that in a way that really hurts us. And unfortunately, we're not doing propaganda in China talking about how they shouldn't do AI. And so I think in a weird way, we're fighting with one hand behind our back right now. And China's taking advantage of that, while our political discourse and our free speech is enabling this type of discussion, which is totally appropriate to have. They are just moving with reckless abandon. And we are going to be at a disadvantage if our house continues to be divided.
I agree with that, and I think that I love free speech, biggest free speech advocate ever, right? But the problem is that some of these AstroTurf pop-up organizations are not honest about what their objectives are, and what their what the background is, what they're trying to really accomplish. So I love to have these open, honest debates, but it seems like one side of this debate is just trying to sabotage what's going on with specifically the data centers, and I guess the increase in AI productivity. They ideologically, I think, have allowed for themselves to do that. That's probably for a different conversation, but they are kind of like an ends justify the means type thought groups, and they think that they can just kind of like manipulate the public into siding with them. And I think public opinion polls have shown that some of those campaigns have become wildly successful. So it's up to us to try to get the truth out about what's going on. I'm sure you've seen, like, every single time you encounter an argument about data centers, there's a new thing that makes them bad, right? Like, it's interesting. I think that you may have shared this in a chat we had recently, that Americans are basically like entirely unaware that they're surrounded by data centers. And there's like these interesting websites to, like, just tell people, like, hey, you probably have a data, like, type in your address. You probably have a data center that's like 4 miles, 2 miles from your house. If you're living in an urban area, it's probably walking distance, right? So it's very interesting that people are like unaware of the fact that these things have existed for many years, have not interrupted their lives, have not fried, their hearing. And it's just like this maniacal campaign, this hysteria that I think it reminds me a lot of the COVID years that we went through, where it's just like, it's just, you can't have, we're starting to get to the point where we can't have rational arguments about this. So how do we, like, reverse course? What are you doing at Build American AI to try to get people, back to the sanity table of this whole dilemma?
Yeah, I mean, it's an uphill battle for sure. And again, I think it's fair to have a discussion of people in your backyard. Like, NIMBYism is not new.
Right.
It's been part of every conversation, and I think it's incumbent on those of us who have a positive vision to explain it and be willing to kind of wrestle with it. two things that we're doing. One is we're actually going into we're meeting with small businesses who actually use AI as part of their everyday business. So yesterday I was in Tampa Bay, Florida, and I met with I think about like 25 30 companies who are all small businesses in the Tampa Bay area, and they're all using AI. They're all using it on the back end. I met a guy Jonathan, who uses it on the back end of his cleaning company, his 10-man cleaning company, and he said like this has been a game changer. It's actually raised revenue by like $250,000 per year. That's great. That's like awesome. There's a woman that was on our panel who talked about how she's using it on the back end for PR and advertising, and how it's really helped them micro target and help them understand how to better use their resources. And I think that's encouraging. I love that. Whether it's farmers using it to help do precision agriculture, which helps them be more resourceful, using and water more efficiently, and also getting the best yield for their crops. That's a good thing. And so I think part of our story part of our effort is going out and talking to communities where there are companies who are using this technology in whole different ways than we were used to, and how it's actually having positive impact. I think we need to get people to talk about it more, so it's not just coming from LLMs and companies based in Silicon Valley. And so I think there's that part. But I think the other part is bringing some of these people and these businesses and these leaders to DC to meet with policymakers and tell that real story. You're wearing a shirt from Reindustrialize right now, which is a summit in Detroit. I love the Reindustrialize Summit. So the Reindustrialize Summit brings together small startups from places like the Gundo in California, Prototown in Texas, Detroit, Grand Rapids in Michigan, South Carolina, Ohio, Maine, people from all over. These are all small startups who are actually building hard tech, whether it's drones or whether it's satellites. They're all building these different things. They're building factories. They're building new construction companies that are using robotics and other parts of AI. And AI is the backbone of all of it. And what they're talking about is how they're bringing jobs to their communities. They're building factories. They're making things. They're hiring people. And I think that that's like the story that also needs to be told. So, like, one is we need to go out and foster dialogue among small businesses to recognize how they're using it in their own world. But then also at the same time, create the venues, create the opportunities for these other companies that are using AI to build physical things, to come to talk to policymakers and tell this story. Because like I saw Sophia Cunningham's tweet yesterday about like why are we replacing, cornfields with data centers? And I'm like, look, like she can point at me all she wants. Like she's a memeable person. She can honestly kind of say whatever she wants. I think she's awesome and funny, but she's misinformed on this. But also, I understand why you would jump to the conclusion of like, oh, data centers are taking over farms. They're going to take over all the farms in Indiana where I play basketball. But then like they
Right.
don't know that it's actually like 1% of all farmland that is actually used for data centers. They don't know that the tax value gained from data centers is 1,000 times more than most crops. They don't know that it helps property values go up. And so it's incumbent on us to tell that story. And so creating these venues and creating these opportunities for people to share and talk about how this is actually, benefiting their lives, I think is a really, really important one to have.
I think that's a great summary of the arguments that we're trying to get through that corporate media, the blocking that they're doing on that side with all of these nefarious funding groups.
Can I
Go ahead.
ask you? I mean, I know you're hosting, but I'm asking you this. What's the alternative? Like I typed into Claude. I'll say it. I use Claude for this particular project, and I said, "What are 100 things that would go away if data centers stopped working tomorrow? What would go away?" It listed 50 jobs and 50 tasks, all of which I use on a regular basis. What do they want? Like, what is it that like? Do they want those jobs, those 50 jobs, to go away? Do they want to not be able to like access email or Zoom with their loved ones? Like, what is it that they want instead of what we have now?
I think for many, in the older demographic specifically, there's like a sense of nostalgia, and they see um, technological trends that they find alarming and end up associating it with AI. Like if you look at these, photos from, say, these like high school graduations in the 90s, right? Like everyone's present, nobody has a cell phone. and it seems really nice, right? But would I go back into 1991 at my same age right now, and have to live that lifestyle? I don't think anyone would willingly decide to do that. But there's this sense that, like, I think that it's like the extension of technology that is bad, and, like, for us it means that we're not doing, or we need to do a better job of telling the story about good things, which is what you were talking about previously. Yeah, the Sophie Cunningham thing, I think it's like a snapshot of where we're at as a culture, society, and, like, clearly again, we have a lot of work to do. The people on the degrowth, pause, stop AI side have a lot of money, have a lot of influence, have a lot of equity in AI companies, funny enough. And I think that, I don't want to position it as an uphill battle, because I think we have the truth on our side. But there's a lot of actors, again, that are like poisoning the conversation. Like, again, it brings me back to like this COVID hysteria, where if you were even to talk about the benefits of some stuff, you'd be likened to like a domestic bioterrorist. um, right? So it's like it's very difficult, but I think you're right. I think you engage in the businesses. It reminds me a lot of I was very young, but like the early internet era, where you're trying to find, like, that this is a revolutionary technology with a lot of seeming applications, and I found a lot of uses for AI. um, but I think that for a lot of people that are just being exposed to this, they're like, wow, this is very interesting. But it's like the early internet era, where it's like, okay, I have access to the internet, but there's like not many websites. I'm a Yankees fan. I'm going to go to Yankees.com. How do I build a business with this? I have no idea, right? So it's like, it's kind of like there's a lack of, because this uh, technology has is so new to so many people. There's also a learning curve that we're experiencing right now that I think was similar to probably the early internet days, where it was kind of like written off, or casted out as a corrupting technology. But I think the stats are very clear. People are using this stuff, and they see, once they use it more, they see a lot of value in it. Of course, it's our job to, as like, in your personal life, I know you've been associated with, like, generally like conservative libertarian politics, to make sure that these AI systems do not, push like woke nonsense in their training. And that's very important. And I think on the right, you're seeing skepticism of AI, because they see these people in California with politics who are entirely opposed to whatever, everything they believe in. And they think, like, why should we let these people build this technology that they're convinced that it's going to harm their lives currently and in the future. But then again, like, you have people like Elon Musk, who's trying to build a truth-seeking AI through SpaceX AI with Grok. So there's a lot of arguments that we're constantly encountering. But I think it's definitely about there's like this nostalgia of the past, and there's an unknown about the future that I think generally scares a lot of people.
No, I think it does, and again, I get that, but what's interesting is when that fear happens and we make rash decisions, like having, like what I think New York is doing by banning any new data center build.
Yeah.
You're also taking away the things that people aren't it's right under their noses that they're not recognizing, which is like the thousands upon 10,000s of jobs that will suddenly go away because of this. I like to highlight the fact that, like, for one 500 megahertz data center, it takes 30,000 truckloads of materials to be transported. That's how many jobs is that? That's just to get the materials to build. Then there's the welders and the construction workers, and the electricians. I work with a group called Nate. Ironically, Nathan works with Nate. These guys build cell phone towers, they build internet infrastructure, they build data centers, and, like, this has been a huge boon for many of these construction companies around the nation. They're building locally in their
Can you
home
give us a
states.
sense of like the financials around, let's say, building like a new data center in like Loudoun County? Like, what kind of like in terms of like the quantitative amount of construction jobs and the like the actual numbers on that? Do you have any of that stuff?
Yeah, so we'll start out with this. So, 30 it requires a 500 megawatt data center requires about 30,000 truckloads of concrete, structure, steel, and copper. And then
Yeah.
it requires, I think, between like 5 and 10,000 jobs relating to construction of that. That's not even mention the trucking. And then you also have the actual economic impact of, again, how all this stuff's coming into there and reverberating out, people buying lunches and food and investing in the community from there. That's just one data center. So then you have that. And then not to mention, again, taxes going down, economic value going up. But like those are tangible numbers for just one build. I
Well, we're
work with
talking about
my
millions of
guys.
dollars in construction
Yes.
salaries, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. No, yeah, it is incredible. I think the numbers I see are like the only time we've seen this much in terms of investment per build is like the equivalent of back in the 1950s when we built the highway system. But like it's like it is the amount of money that we spent on highway spending in the 50s in 1 year, we're doing in 2 months. So it's that times six every year. And the interesting thing is they're investing in the heartland. It's not Silicon Valley. It is rural Virginia. It is rural Ohio. It is Florida. It is Texas. And the concern people have actually beyond the whole fake water thing, which as we know is used as a small percentage of what people think they use, the sound which is being mitigated. The bigger one, I think, is actually one that it hits people's pocketbooks. It hits their wallets. I think it makes sense. Is the question of like energy costs. And it is true that in a state like New York, where you are spending so much money on energy as it is, because New York has policies that actually made it hard to build out more energy capacity. They shut down the only nuclear reactor. They shut down all these alternative options that were more efficient. They banned fracking and natural gas and gas power state of factory gas energy plants, all the while investing in like renewables and like things that are not as efficient, and they're like shocked that data centers are contributing to the increased costs of consumers. Well, guess what, Ms. Hochul? If you rethought the regulatory regime, if you stopped kowtowing to environmentalists and kind of far progressive left on these issues, you wouldn't have cost issues. What the company Valor, Valor Atomic is doing by actually, building the nuclear facility, basically being the data center is being powered by the nuclear facility that they're building next door. It's basically entirely a closed loop, not just in the water, but also in the energy. They're not going to have energy they can sell back to the community, give back to the community, that then increases the energy supply, which then also involves a long-term investment. So, Jordan, I'm talking about this is like 5 to 10,000 jobs for one data center. Oh, and not, by the way, 5 to 10% increase in permanent jobs in counties that build. Brookings has a great study. I think it's actually 5 to 8% increase, not 5 to 10, 5 to 8% increase in counties that build. Again, that's the part of this that's going away. New York is committing economic seppuku by saying we're not going to build and these jobs are going to go away. That's the part that really kills me is we're not talking about those jobs. Where do those guys go? They had plans for the next 6 months to be building on these data centers. Where do they go?
It's unfortunate because New York is a giant state with a lot of land to build data centers, but Kathy Hochul represents narrow interests, mostly aligned around the New York metro area. And I think a lot of these counties in upstate New York would benefit with an absolute windfall in untold tens of millions in tax revenue that is now going to be stripped from them and sent to another state because of this moratorium.
Right.
It's like I think if the right should really understand this as like you are getting totally screwed over by Kathy Hochul, especially in counties where the average income is sometimes near the poverty line. And like I think that some of these local officials are getting a lot of pushback, but some of it is just because they're looking like people say, oh, you're just corrupted by Amazon, they're giving you a sweetheart deal. But on the other side, like before we judge these local officials, who a lot of them are elected, like maybe they're just trying to increase the tax revenue and better their public schools and emergency services with windfall in these assessed data centers, um, provide enormous tax revenue because they have these very valuable server farms within them that are rightly taxed at a certain rate, and they're willing, as long as there's no sweetheart deals, I don't see the downside, because like once you have that data center it's very cost prohibitive to pack it up and move it somewhere else. But I do see, I think on the energy front that I totally agree with people who say that we shouldn't have our energy bills go up because of this, and I think that you're right that nuclear is probably the ultimate workaround, but nuclear seems to be the cautionary tale that we should be citing more, because in the during the Nixon administration they basically paused the nuclear build out, and it still has yet to fully continue. I think now there's fewer, you know, bureaucratic regulations, and you're seeing a lot of these interesting startups. And I'm sure you encounter these founders all the time, whether it's through Valor or through a dozen other these companies that are trying to build smaller or repackaged or modernized nuclear facilities. Right now, we don't seem to have the capacity to slap one of these things next to a data center. But I think we're getting close to the point where we're going to the energy component is going to be solved through engineering, through these either the big nuclear companies that already exist or through the startups.
I mean, that is exactly right. I'm just looking at the Kevin O'Leary project in Utah. His prediction was 4,000 construction jobs just there, and then up to 2,000 permanent jobs long term. So again, like that's just one example. I just wanted to use an example that I could highlight. But it's not every one of those guys, men and women, are a story. It's a family. It's an opportunity. There's an article in 6 CBS News out of Richmond, Virginia, featuring an electrician named Josh Price. And Josh Price he's from Henrico, Virginia. He's building data centers in Virginia. Again, local teams working in his state. And he talked about how this gives him dignity. Like he said, I actually was looking at moving out of state to find different work, mainly because like there wasn't good construction long-term electrician jobs, and now he has an opportunity to buy a house. He can actually have dignity. He says here, I love this line. He says, I want to make sure I got this right. He said, here we go. It's made it so that people like me can buy houses. It's made it so that people like me don't just have health insurance, but have good health insurance. It's not just for themselves, but they're for their family, and not just health insurance, but vision and dental. He goes on and talk about how like I have dignity in this job, and I just think that's like, here you go. It's brought dignity to so many people, and the dignity of hard work, of honest work. We're creating a generation of builders. Like that's the exciting thing here. For so much is this millennial malaise about how we don't build anything, how kids have a sense of loss of meaning, and too many people on social media and stuff. I don't know if we're talking about like hiring 400,000 electricians, if we're talking about building out a new generation of people to build, and welders and construction. Isn't that something we should be encouraging? Like, what's weird is a lot of people who are anti-AI, Humans First highlights this. They're like, we don't build anything anymore. Guess what? We can.
Yeah.
I was at the Reindustrialize Summit, and I heard the company Monumental AI go into detail about how AI can make beautiful architecture again. The price for stone has been too expensive over the past 50, 60 years. It's too hard to use stone to build as a facade, as a part of a building. So like the Art Deco of Detroit is a perfect example. It's actually too expensive to build up that architecture anymore. AI is actually getting us to go away from just concrete to these other materials that you can put on the facades and to make beautiful, beautiful stuff. And his point was, like, why would we want to hinder that ability? Like, if we have the creativity and the productivity to build and the time to build, why not do it the right way? And again, like why would we want to hinder the ability to doing that? And that's the part they haven't explained to me what that alternative is. I just watched the movie Hamnet last night. By the way, I cried, to be fair. It's the movie about William Shakespeare and one of his kids. Okay, I don't want to go back to 16th century England. Like, I'm sorry. I like this like abundance. I don't want to live in a one-room house without running water and electricity. Like, I don't know where Joe Allen and the Humans First people want to go back to. Is it the 1950s? Well, for the 1950s, why can't I solve the problems that I can solve now? I don't want to I don't want to spend, what was it, 20% of my household income on a refrigerator for the 1950s? That's what the Wall Street Journal video was earlier this week. Like, why would I want to go back to that? I
Yeah,
don't,
this is the problem
it
with
doesn't
central
make
planning.
any sense. Yes.
It's the problem with central planning is that they want to pause it. They don't really like where we're at right now because they wanted to pause it 2 years ago and 3 years ago too. But now AI has reached a level that's not just a 10, but it's an 11 on the scale, and they just want to pause it indefinitely until they can form a committee to decide when to move forward. And meanwhile, China's just laughing at probably the incompetence of this argument. You're right; it doesn't make sense. And you
We're
know,
making, oh, sorry, go ahead.
and I think that some of the reason why it doesn't make sense is it's purposeful. I'm not saying that this is necessarily the mission of an organization like Humans First, but there are organizations started by interested AI parties that are basically of this mindset that, hey, if we can just capture the market and make it impossible for our competitors to catch up to us, like that's okay too. So we're going to fund these pause AI groups and hope that, like, the communists don't revolt against, the current party that is them. But it doesn't make sense to me as, a maneuver, and I think it's going to backfire.
A lot of it also comes down to this idea that, like, there's this fatalistic worldview that comes through in a lot of the predictions, and it's like there's this belief that there's no other way than their prescriptions for what's going to happen. So, like, their prophecies are what we must follow. Jeffrey Hinton saying that radiology is going to be, like, zeroed out, and that's just not true. Like, in fact, it's the opposite. I'll give you a heads up. My team, we're releasing a study on this, that says just this fact, which is that, like, not only has we seen an increase in radiology, radiologists are more productive than they've ever been before. They're able to do things and help people and identify issues far ahead of time. And because of the time saved because of AI and the tools in the medical profession, it's allowing them to have better care, to have less stress, so that they can focus on the job of being, there for their patients, and to help direct them, and to create plans that can help treat very severe illnesses. The workforce for U.S. radiologists is literally up 17.3% over the past 7 years. The Mayo Clinic radiology staff, for example, has grown by 55% since Hinton's warning in 2016. He said that, like, he literally predicted that medical schools should stop teaching radiology. It would just be phased out. And, like, we're just proving with hard evidence that's not true. And we're seeing that in industry after industry. There was a New York Times story. New York Times, my man, New York Times, just put the article out literally just now. America's enterprising spirit is booming after decades-long slump. Hundreds of thousands of people are creating companies this year in a way that they've never done before. Hundreds of thousands. Like, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And it goes against their narrative.
I think that when more people realize that AI is just a great productivity tool and not a human replacement machine, they'll see the true value. And you're right, the entrepreneurs who have been early to this see that, it can basically just, it can maximize the ideas coming out of your head and turn it into reality in a way that hasn't necessarily been possible before, or you just couldn't scale it by yourself before. This era of the solopreneur who can, of course, contract out to a lot of other people using AI. But I think, Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, said it best that, you need to compete in this age of AI, and you need to know how to use AI, or else you're going to be replaced by someone else who's using AI either better than you, or because you've just entirely opted out of this technology. I see that, that seems like it could be like a threatening concept to some people, but it's like the you know the Pandora's box has opened. The genie's not going back in the bottle. There's this amazing productivity tool. It's like refusing to use, like, let's say when the first digital calculator came out, and you either had the ability to do like your advanced your advanced math exam with a calculator, and you're like, no, 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 I'm a purist here. I'm gonna write everything out by hand, and you have 1 hour, and then everyone in your classroom that's using a calculator beats you, and then you just like get mad and want to destroy the calculator technology. That's what it seems to me with people that are just like mad at AI for the sake of being mad at AI. And but I think you're right that there's giant amount of misinformation, and there's bad predictions being made by these otherwise very sophisticated people that have just been flat out wrong. Uh, these are like computer scientists and engineers that are very familiar with AI, but they've just it's like a doctor who just reads an X-ray incorrectly, or provides the wrong script for something. Like they've just been totally wrong on this. This the fundamental prediction that AI was going to destroy the economy and lead to like this massive job loss has not happened.
No, you're exactly right. And a part of me also thinks it's because eggheads are going to egghead. Like, I think there's an
Mhm.
importance for academics, and I think obviously I think they're important, but like they're not small businesses. They're not entrepreneurs. They're not innovators. They live in ivory towers and write papers, and they don't get outside. They like there's a vitamin D deficiency that does exist here. And it's funny is when you take people who actually have a growth mindset, whose goal in life is not to get published in some academic journal, but to actually create things for their community and participate in the local economy. They're saying, wait a second, this tool can allow me to do something I couldn't do before. Again, I'm reading this New York Times article right now. It highlights this girl named Cassidy Winkler. She had an idea. She started researching how to start her own boutique Pilates business, including what kind of training instructors were needed. And by early 2025, with the assistance of chatbots, including ChatGPT, she came up with a name, a logo, and a plan. Soon, Miss Winkler, age 26, opened studios in Lake Geneva, Madison, and Monoma. She now has 65 employees and is set to unveil a fourth studio this year. Like, I don't think Hinton's thinking about her. He doesn't think that a former hockey player who was a flight attendant on a private jet is going to be able to see this tool and create things. By the way, but we see this with YouTube too. Like Mr. Beast wasn't a guy, he wasn't a cinematographer. He trained in Hollywood. No, he was a kid who took a video and realized I can do something with this and create a multiple $1 billion industry. People like you have Substacks. You're not trained journalists, but you start learning and you start realizing with these tools, I can reach new audiences. This is like how real people work. And like again, like the naysayers don't want us to have like growth ideas. They don't want us to like go beyond, reach the stars. They don't want us to reject the premise in front of us. You are locked in to your world, and that's all it's going to be. And I just think that that's not the case. I don't know if she has this Cassidy Winkler has the same IQ as Dr. Hinton, but like she doesn't need it. She just can go out and do. You can just go do things. It's crazy. I don't
Right.
understand why people don't like. And again, like that's so much of like the humans first narrative. That's so much of the doomer narrative is like, we just can't, you can't do that. How dare you think that? And like, we're going to use false flag narratives and misnomers to confuse people. And I just think that's like really frustrating. And it doesn't actually reflect reality that we see every day.
Yeah, it seems almost that there's a sense of gatekeeping, like that there's a way that they see the world, right? And it's like, how dare you create all these Pilates institutions without, asking for permission first from the general, authorities in your state or across state lines. Like, you can't just build this business on the internet. You need to go through, these bureaucrats that need to rubber stamp or what we're doing, but need to make it very difficult for you to live your life as an entrepreneur. So it's just it's just bizarre to me, to see again these arguments coming out of like these very ideological. Go ahead.
According to a recent report from Gusto, a small business payroll and benefits service, nearly 60% of their founders on its platform have used AI, and it has enabled them to do things more efficiently and effectively. Why are we bemoaning this? Like, that's what I just don't understand. You could not like some Silicon Valley tycoons because we live in a world where we're just jealous of people who have more money than us. But why would you be upset at your neighbors for starting a business and seeing an opportunity in building and hiring people. That's the part that these guys don't want to share.
And
And like,
and it's the biggest strategic advantage that America has. Like, if we're gonna, come out on top in this AI race or just this geopolitical competition with China, like this is the advantage we have, right? Like they can churn out millions of engineers and computer scientists, but they do not have the freedom to start businesses so easily without, the central party clamping down on them, and that's their ultimate disadvantage. That's our ultimate advantage. So you're right, like it's depressing to see when people are trying to mitigate that.
what gets at me with this is that, like, she's not sitting in front of a computer screen all day. Like the
Mhm.
humans first of the world say this is going to make us a slave to the screen and social media. No, actually, in this article, she's describing how through AI she learns an efficient manner to go do things. And by the way, her picture is her like working out and doing the things she wants to do and loves in the world. Why would I bemoan that? I wrote this article a couple of weeks ago, or an X post, and did a TV hit on this where I talk about the Jeremy Clarkson show, Clarkson's Farm, and how he uses robots to help, like a robot tractor and precision agriculture, to improve his ability to farm his land in England. And at first, his staff was concerned that this means they'll be out of a job. And what they learned was that it actually allowed them to finish the dozens of other tasks that they had before them. And Jeremy learned was that because his tractor was out in the fields, he had time to do the things he loved, which was being with his family, which was being with the people that he cared about, which was doing the things that give him joy. And again, like, why would I want to lock people into the old mindset? Like, you have to do things like we did 100 years ago. You have to work 9 to 5. Like, I want to live in a world where the Dolly Parton song 9 to 5 is an anachronism. Why can't we live in a world where people can do what makes sense for them to be as productive, if not more productive, with their world? I again, it's incredibly frustrating, but also it's incumbent for us to wear our reindustrialized sweatshirts and go out and say, like, there's a better way forward. More people should see this.
I agree. I think there's a unique arbitrage opportunity right now for people that are starting AI businesses. And there is this, like, it floats around in the press a lot, this idea that, the pie is at a certain, circumference now, and we can't grow the pie. So when AI becomes this amazing productivity tool for everyone, it's just going to like take everyone else's jobs away. Like this concept, for whatever reason, that so many of these, lefty economists or AI doomers can understand is that like the pie can just grow and we can just have more human flourishing, better jobs, people making more money, and the US even having a greater competitive advantage than it already has today because we'll have the best tools to build these amazing products and services. Or, we don't need to necessarily use AI for our businesses. We can just use it for, to improve our lives, to improve our health. There's so many potential applications, especially, people worried about, the, there's a very legitimate worry about, the ideological corruption in AI. But then we have like these open source models that help out with that. And I think, the future is very bright for this. And um, it's what do you make of like the doomer argument that like all the jobs are going to go away, that they just like fundamentally won't accept this idea? Because you're right, like you kind of talked about how there's the that Jeremy Clarkson, I think, is like using robots, right? But then immediately doomers will say, well, if they're not using humans and they're using robots, then there's no jobs for humans. But like, yes, the robots can just assist the humans, but I think what we find is that, again, like, it's a free country, right? So even people that are on our side, sometimes they're not necessarily perfectly on message, and they say like, "Hey, actually, the jobs are going away, but we're gonna have so much money that we'll just do a UBI for everyone." And then like, the normal citizen responds that like, "Hey, maybe I should be more, maybe I should be asking more questions about this technology." So I think we encounter a little bit of that too. Like we don't have like it's impossible to have a perfectly coordinated message on how AI will result in human flourishing to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it was fair for the farmhand on the TV show to say to Jeremy, "Would this take my job away?" But Jeremy responded, "I have too many tasks for us that it's I need you. Like I need you to run the robot. I need you to run the combine. I
Right.
need you to do all these other things that are important. But also, you're now learning a skill that you could then use this robot and go do elsewhere. You have a competitive advantage against other people." But then also Jeremy brings this up, and I thought about this too watching that show. No one bemoans the fact that 100 years ago we had to thresh wheat and barley by hand to do the same thing he did on that show with two guys and a tractor and a combine would require 100 people 100 years ago to do the same amount of work.
And
No,
100 years ago, chances are both of us would be working in the agriculture industry. And if we
yes.
were to
And by
look
the way,
at
no one is asking, like Joe Allen and Humans First, are they asking us to go back and do that job? Like that's what I don't understand is that like no. We've found out that you can use technology innovation and what required human power, human threshing with the thresher and all that stuff you can actually do in a different way now, and you can actually, but like we're not bemoaning that. The fact is that like farmers aren't going back and be like, oh, we should just do everything by hand. We should hand pick every piece of corn instead of having a machine do it for us. Like, no, automation has been part of our process. Like ever since we learned to read, everything since we invented the wheel, we have always found new ways of delivering services and solving problems. That's what this is about, solving problems, which then allow people to solve other problems they wouldn't have had time to do anyway. Like I look, I mean, Senator Ben Sass like has 95% less cancerous tumors in his pancreas. Now he's still like saying that he has a death sentence and he is not expecting to really live, and survive this. But he's living longer. He is having time with his family. We are finding out, medical advances that are creating real opportunities. Chris Johnson, the famous NFL and running back for the Tennessee Titans, has ALS, and guess what he's using to communicate with his family? AI. Should we like? Do we want him not to be able to communicate with his family? Should he just be stuck with his thoughts for the rest of his existence? No, I think it's a better idea. And so again, like we are solving new problems. We don't know what other jobs and tasks we will have before us. Like vocation isn't going away. It's part of our lives. This is where Jordan. This is a little bit rambling, but I will say it. I just reject the UBI idea. If AI is a catalyst for great change, then we should be using it to solve our national debt, to rethink our entitlement system, to like rethink the way our energy system works, our education. We could use this in conservative principles to actually transform our communities and not just go UBI, but actually like have human autonomy and self-control and independence that actually is really in line with the ideas of the flag on your sweater, which, by the way, for those listening at home, is an American flag. Like, I'm ready to
Yeah,
go. Like, let's do this.
I,
We need more of this.
I think a lot of it is about perspective and how you see the future, right? Like, so if you're talking to a doomer who says that, how do you know that this time it's not different and that the historical trend will break because this technology is just so different? And my response is generally just like, I choose to be optimistic about the future, and you choose to be a doomer about the future. And like my job isn't to, I can show you the historical patterns, but they have every right to believe that the world is going to come to an end. But I don't want to participate in in a society where everyone believes the world's going to end, and therefore in order to stop this idea that I disagree with, that the world's going to come to an end, we need to stop the growth of technology and the building of our modern physical technological infrastructure. It just seems so ridiculous to me. But I think that when you um, for the commoner in America, there's a disconnect between your general thought process about this stuff and what they're thinking in these like elite tech bubbles in Silicon Valley, um, with like either this like effective altruist ideology or just like the general doomer sentiments. You don't see this across America. So when these forces are trying to like hijack the conversation, it's super alarming to me. And I think that like what happens is that in these like industries, there's a lot of overlap. Like the guy who's funding the Stop AI protest might also be funding something that like an executive finds like kind of good, or donating something to, an important senator's reelection campaign. So we're not, speaking out enough, I think, about what's going on the West Coast in these tech bubbles. And I think that with, especially with what you're doing with Build American AI, it's a very unique mission. And then you guys are also, kind of getting involved in some of these very consequential races. Do you want to speak to what your strategy is on the political front?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I can't really give a great answer, unfortunately. So Build American AI, we're the C4, and we do a lot of policy advocacy and engagement and education around the country in DC and in the states. We are separate from Leading the Future, which is the political action committee, super PAC that actually really engages in the races directly. So I pay attention to it, and I think it's been.
Right.
I think the one thing I would say is it's been exciting to watch our team identify and work with members on both sides of the aisle who recognize how important AI is to the future of our nation and success of our country. But like, in terms of which races they're going in and how they're engaging, I fortunately, I can say fortunately, I get to focus on the other side of that conversation, which also is reflective of my past experience. I am not a campaign guy. I'm also not a wonk. I mean, I have more vitamin D in my system than most, think tankers. So like I'm in this weird spot where when members of Congress get elected, I get to work with them to build coalitions to get across the finish line. And then I also work with think tanks and other advocacy groups and academics and others to kind of like develop ideas for research and identify issues that are interesting to policymakers to then help inform their approach to these, pressing issues. But, I'm kind of like a C3PO. I'm kind of translating to different people. But like, as you know, campaign people, the political people, they think very differently. They have a very specific set of talking points in the way they engage and how they think about things. The think tank academic bros, they have a very a different way of doing things. And I'm kind of in the middle trying to figure out how to translate between the two of them. And, Build American AI is a great place to do that because, we can put out a report like the radiologist report or these state specific studies that we're doing. And I get to pay attention to the races, but, thankfully I'm not, dealing with, day to day, races and how they're playing out and polling and all
Yeah,
that
my
stuff.
mistake in mixing up the two organizations.
No, it's okay,
You're
but it
doing a
gives you
good
an idea of what
job.
I do and how I fit into it.
Yeah. So, what is your from January 1st to today? What's your sense of the landscape in DC on this issue? Have things improved? Are things getting messier? With this China issue, with what the White House is doing. What's your sense of how the evolution is ongoing in 2026?
I think the ingredients are there to get a national framework across the finish line. I think there are members on both sides of the aisle who really do believe that America needs to lead and America needs to have a set of rules that make sense for us. I do think the patchwork argument of the states is not always coming through. Um, and I think that people, I think, generally recognize there needs to be a thing we can go forward. And I think, unfortunately, we are running out of time to get that done before the end of Congress. There are a couple of vehicles and opportunities in the near future to do things. I also think that like there is interest in using certain, if you would say, chits or sort of like points of leverage. So like if you can protect kids' safety and attach it to like a conversation around federal preemption around AI, I think those two things could work together. I think there's incentives aligned to be like, hey, let's like enable AI, but also protect children. Like that's a good selling point. I think seeing the concerns with the rise of Chinese technology and AI should light a fire under people to like say, hey, we got to move forward on this. I do think the White House has also demonstrated that AI is not less regulated than a ham sandwich. Like Max Tegmark and these doomers keep on saying AI doesn't have regulations. That's actually not true. We have seen over the past several months that the administration can use different levers of government power to hold up things and slow things down as they think is necessary. And I think it's important for the country to have a holistic vision of that and a holistic approach to that. But I think it's also worth noting that like the narrative that there are no rules and regs on AI is absolutely like untrue. That is BS. We have seen over the past several months that we have the ability, we have levers to hold these entities accountable. And so, how do we codify that in a system that makes sense for all entrepreneurs across the board going forward? That's the task ahead of us. And so, I think actually the White House has done a very good job of articulating that, like, there is a role for a federal framework and the space for a framework here to give certainty. And so the question becomes, can policymakers actually, get together and actually hammer that out? And so it's not helpful when the Chinese are pushing anti-data centers narratives and confusing people. But like, not just that, there are people who are very generally confused or confirmed, have concern, and it's incumbent on us to keep on telling that story.
Yeah, in terms of this regulatory environment and just the legal environment generally, you have so many of these people on the West Coast in these EA, effective altruist aligned groups saying that they need to set up a system of like rules that seem to me like they are new laws essentially to govern how, let's say like how the Pentagon is allowed to use AI systems. And for me, this just seems like an attempt by certain entities to kind of like hijack the leadership position in the space or hijack, the regulatory hierarchy. Like there was this whole spat between the War Department and Anthropic that continues to go on, and I think that a lot of people in the Pentagon are still upset with Anthropic with how they conducted business, but their argument was that like, hey, our system of laws is not enough and that we need to have the
Right.
final say. And that's like, as a citizen who elects some of these people, I mean, not the people in the Pentagon, but elected by or chosen by the duly elected president, confirmed by the Senate. I think it's like an insult to Americans for these EA lefties on the West Coast to say, oh, yeah, the American Constitution and our system of laws is not enough. We need to set up this in giant like overburdensome regulatory regime because AI is just too dangerous for our current laws.
No, that's exactly right. And that really does, um, it just kind of embodies sort of the different worldviews that we have in the conversation. And um, I don't want to sell out our military's ability to do what they need to do to a couple companies, a couple CEOs. I think
Yeah.
we should be able to use the tools at our disposal to protect ourselves. Also brings up a good point that, like, for all the concern about jobs, the military is investing heavily in AI and is hoping to have a military force that can actually use AI, different tools and different skill sets. I have a close family friend who joined the military recently. Actually, no, yeah, a family member close who joined the military recently, and he was surprised how much this is part of his day to day and how much it's part of his training. He's actually excited because he's going to get to learn about robotics and drones and other parts of the system that he wouldn't have otherwise learned, and may actually create opportunities for him down the road that he didn't imagine. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm really, when Pete Hegseth has more than enough soldiers to serve, then I think I'll start thinking about those job issues. But like until then, we do have a lot of opportunities out there. Like again, I don't agree with Trey Stevens' idea of like having mandatory civil service, but he brings up an interesting point, which is that there are a lot of entities within the government and the military and other services where we need good people. Bodies are needed, and we don't have a lack of jobs. We have a lack of occupants who want to do them. And so until that happens, until we run out of those, I'm not worried about these kind of doomsday predictions. I'm not worried about. I think Hinton's wrong on radiologists. I think he's wrong about a lot of things. I think I'm more excited about seeing what we can actually use, whether it's in the military or defense or other things at our disposal.
Yeah, it's just it seems just so offensive to like it should be so offensive, I think, to the average American, where it's like, let's say that God forbid, some country has launched a missile at us, and we have this sophisticated program, right, that can like say like a space weapon, right, that's autonomous,
Hmm.
and it can shoot down that missile. But it's like, oh, first, Pete needs to make a call to someone at a frontier AI companies and say, oh, oh, can I have permission to use your tool that you're contracted out to me? Like, it's just so absurd to me. And like anyone with any sense, I think, of like our system of our constitutional framework would like really be, I think, should be kind of like offended by the idea that I don't know about you, but it just seems to me that there's like an ongoing power grab, but they don't acknowledge it as a power grab.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily blame them because of how much leverage some of these companies have, especially our frontier companies. But isn't it ultimately up to like our public servants and our policymakers appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, to really like represent the American people here and say like, AI is not going to be only for select parties, but like, but and this is the problem with the regulatory framework, is it kind of like, or not just the framework, but like installing a new regulatory regime specifically to create a moat for some of these companies. I just find it very alarming what they're doing, but I don't necessarily like. I understand why like corporate is trying to do that, because like they are also trying to carve out a market for themselves. But I think it's up to like those of us who have like certain principles that I think want to back this technology, who also need to say like, hey, we need to represent the American people here and make sure that like that they are being accounted for too.
Bingo. And again, the autonomous military weapons is one thing, but also a surveillance question. I think that's a fair question
Mhm.
about like how could AI be used to enable a surveillance state. But guess what? That's a
Yeah,
congressional question. There's like, and by the way, there's been authorization conversations on Section 215 and 702, 702 happening right now. And by the way, I didn't see any AI company have any thoughts about, curtailing use of AI to protect people, protect Americans. I've not seen them. I see them use it as a rhetorical jab when they're at odds with the Department of War. But when it actually comes to, actually the conversation which is happening in Congress right now, I'm not seeing anything about it. So it's like,
right.
I do wonder how genuine that is, or how much of that is just a talking point. Because I think it's actually a fair one. I think like, I don't mind flock cameras at all. I think that makes sense. But like, I think it's a fair question to have. Like, what are they? Who are using them?
For
How does
sure.
this fit in with the Fourth Amendment? All that stuff. Fair, totally fair question for people to ask. But like, let's make sure we're talking about that instead of some other like, hyperbolic fear that is unsubstantiated.
Yeah, yeah. The getting into the weeds over flock cameras has become a very divisive issue on the right. And
I
I'm surprised at how these things kind of spring up. And a lot of this technology is like, I guess flock is the best innovator in capturing license plates. But a lot of this data collection stuff, which I think we're right to be skeptical about, has been around for a while. Like if I were to look at my iPhone right now, it'd probably be telling me that like it's constantly processing whatever I'm doing through several apps, right? So it's interesting how these issues spring up, and how organic they are. And I think it's also like just having the situational awareness that we've talked about previously, that a lot of this stuff could be like foreign psyops and the doomers being dishonest about where they're at. But yeah, of course, I agree with you that their surveillance state threat is always prominent. And I think that it's very clear, based on the guidance of our founders, to do what we can to push back against that stuff, especially in the halls of power in DC. But yeah, Nathan, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know you got a series of debates and conversations tonight in DC, and there's always a lot of action there, so I'm sure you got things to do. But where can people find your work and your stuff on X?
Yeah. So I think the best thing on X is Nathan Leamer DC is my handle. You can also check out our website, buildamericanai.org, as our advocacy organization. I think those are the two that would be worthwhile highlighting. You're right. I'm in a debate being hosted by Forum, a new media entity that's like opposing views of AI on the right. And the aforementioned Humans First affiliate, Joe Allen, who was like the founder of it, but then was forced out like a month or two after finding it. I don't know. Maybe at the debate, I'll learn like why he mysteriously left. Like, I was the too transhumanist for him. I have no idea, but you know, we'll have a good a sparring session. You know, my goal in life is to be self-deprecating, and not take things too seriously. I don't think he's capable of doing that, but I'll do my part. But it should be a good discussion. And yeah, it's in DC. It's like tonight at 6:30, I think. So that'll be fun. But you know, there's all sorts of events. I was in Tampa yesterday. I'm doing some events in DC in September. We got plenty of stuff coming, and I look forward to keeping the conversation alive with you and talking more about it.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And I encourage, the listeners and viewers of this podcast to get involved in the AI conversation and just to learn as much as you can about this stuff because again, like it's relatively new technology and open to anyone's opinions and insights and comments. And Nathan, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.